So how did things go last week when you were working on Learning Plan 4? Are the tissues coming along and getting it? We'll go through again today. After we go through our Learning Plan 5 stuff, we'll come back and we'll look at Learning Plan 4, and we'll just that because it's helpful to keep going through it. And good to go. Now today we're going to be covering Learning Plan 5. And remember, we covered Learning Plans 4 and 5 together. So this was a 2-week span that we were covering Learning Plans 4 and 5. So, excuse me. So after today, we'll have completed those 2 learning plans. And so once you get through your Learning Plan 4 and 5 assignments, then you go ahead and take your Learning Plans 4 and 5 exams. And then next week, we'll start Learning Plan 6, which is the skeletal system. Cover Learning Plan 6, and then again, we'll have that ready for you. So I will, banning any forgetfulness on my part, I'll open up Learning Plan 6 already today, so that way you have access to that if you're ready. Learning Plans 4 and 5 exam is already available. Okay, so let me just get the lights and then we'll get started on Learning Plan 5. Okay, so Learning Plan 5, which if you're following along in your notes, starts on page 4 of your notes, the integumentary system. Now, today is the first day that we're getting into a system. We've been talking about the different structural levels of organization. We talked about the chemical level, bless you, chemical level, the cellular level, and then now we were at the tissue level, because you take cells and put them together, you make tissues. Now what we're doing is we're taking the different tissues, which you'll see here today, and then we're putting them together to form organs and even go into systems. I kind of mentioned this before, either last week or the week before. When we talk about the skin, we think of the skin as, and people say the skin is the largest organ of the body. Technically, it's kind of like an organ system because it exhibits the properties of an organ, that you have multiple tissues that are put together, but also there are structures within the skin. So actually, technically, it is. So we're going to talk about 2 main components today. We're going to talk about the skin and then the stuff that's sticking out of the skin. Hair, nails, and so forth. So we're going to discuss all these things. So when we look at, oops, I didn't bring up my PowerPoint here. Let me, that of course, is the one thing. Grab my PowerPoint quickly. Grab that. What? Okay, so if you look at this picture, you can see that the skin actually consists of 2 main and larger regions. And to connect here. All right, so we got 2 main regions of the skin. We've got this outer region here. Oh, don't do this. Got the, you want me to do this, don't you? Okay. Line this. It's not a bad thing to do this because not wacky, but still learning how this board works. It was upgraded, so it's doing different things. All right, so anyway, look at this outer layer. This outer layer is called the epidermis, and then we have a deeper region, which is called the dermis. And in the dermis, we have 2 regions. We have the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Looking at the 2 layers kind of on the surface or at a very general, with a very general view, you can see that the dermis is made up of 2 regions, the papillary layer and the reticular layer, I said before. But look what's in the dermis. What do you see as the difference between the epidermis and the dermis? What are some differences that you see? Go ahead, yeah.
It looks like basically.
Yeah.
The dermis, and then the epidermis is more dead.
Yeah, so from a general perspective, it looks like there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the dermis, whereas the epidermis just kind of looks like you said, like dead tissue. For the most part, I would agree with that. I mean, you look at everything that's in the dermis. We have the roots of the hairs, and we'll also see that nails start in the dermis, and we have our blood vessels and nerve endings and muscles and glands. All of that is located in the dermis, the deeper part. And then at the top on the surface, we have the epidermis, which just looks like a bunch of layers of skin, or I should say epithelial tissue. And that is largely correct. What we see here is that the epidermis is basically made up of multiple layers of epithelial cells. This would be the stratified squamous epithelial tissue that we talked about. What's the function of stratified squamous epithelial tissue? Protect from abrasion, right? So we can basically slough off some superficial layers of the skin, no problem. So yeah, so there we are. If you look at this general picture, you're also going to notice that deep to the dermis, we have something called the hypodermis, or we call it the subcutaneous tissue. It's not part of the skin. It lies below, and it's a combination of adipose tissue and areolar tissue. So we see that this layer below that is made of this. So we think of it this way. If you've ever had ham, if you've ever eaten ham, like off the bone, if you take the ham and you slice it, the skin is still on the ham, right? And then you can peel away like an outer layer, and then there's that layer of fat like around the outside before you get into the actual meat. That fatty layer is the hypodermis. So it's great to think of that when you're thinking about eating. Or if you eat chicken, and you peel off the chicken, sometimes depending on the like a chicken breast usually is pretty good for this. If you take the chicken breast and you peel the skin off the chicken breast, sometimes on the underneath that skin that you're peeling off is kind of that fatty layer before you get down to the actual meat. Again, that's the same thing. That's the hypodermis. That's that fatty underlayer below the dermis that is there. And you'll see that the hypodermis is a place of tissue storage, but also you'll notice that the skin slides on the layers beneath it. So that fatty layer actually allows for lack of friction. So it allows for the skin to kind of glide smoothly on top of the structures below it. So it has a couple of functions. So we have the hypodermis. Let's take a look at the epidermis. Epi means like above. Epi, above the dermis, right? Epidermis. And if you look at the picture on the left, you'll see kind of like a microscopic picture of the epidermis, and over here on the right side you see more of like an illustrated picture. And what we see here are 1, 2, 4 layers. There's actually a 5th layer to talk about that you don't see on here. So what we see from a general perspective is that the epidermal cells that are located at the bottom are living cells. And as they work their way up to the top, as we see it here on the screen, as they work their way to the superficial, they're going to change. They're basically going to die off. And so by the time they make it to this top layer here called the stratum corneum, they're going to be dead cells that are basically able to slough off. There you are. Come on. All right. So let's talk about these different layers. We'll start off with the first layer, which is called the stratum basal, or the basal layer. Now, don't confuse this with the basement membrane. Remember we talked about the basement membrane that's below epithelial tissue? Now, this is kind of an exception to the rule because we said we have a basal layer and we have an apical layer. Well, the basal layer, when it comes to epidermis, is not like a basement tissue or basement membrane. It's actually the dermis. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That lies below. Now, within this lowest level, or these lower levels of the epidermis, you're going to see some other structures present. There's a reference to them in your notes. Top of page 5. Letter C, number 2, we talk about the different cells of the epidermis. So the main type of cell that we see in the epidermis are those stratified squamous cuboidal cells, epithelial cells. That's what we see most of the time. The reason, now they're going to have a special name. We're going to call these keratinocytes. The term keratinocyte. So cyte means cell, so keratinocyte. So keratinocyte, it has this protein in it called keratin. The protein keratin is sort of like a protective type of substance. And it sort of makes the cell sort of waterproof, water resistant. What we're going to see is that the cells that are close to the bottom, closest to the dermis, are not going to have a lot of keratin in them, but as they start to change and they start to die off, they will be essentially become these sacs of keratin. That's really all they are. It's just this sac full of keratin that isn't alive. So they become more keratinized as they move up. So the main cell type that you'll see in the epidermis is the keratinocyte, but you also see some other cells. We have this one here that's a little bit grayish in color. That's a melanocyte, and it secretes a protein called melanin. Some of you may have heard of melanin already. Does anybody know what melanin is or what it does to your skin? Go out and you spend a lot of time in the sun and you're exposed to ultraviolet rays of the sun. What happens to your skin? Burn it. What happens to it? It's tanning, it's darker. So the ultraviolet rays of the sun activate melanocyte, and the melanocyte secretes melanin, which is a protective substance that protects your skin from the harmful rays of ultraviolet. If you're out gradually and you give yourself gradual exposure to the sun, and you allow the melanocytes to do their work, they can protect you pretty well from the harmful rays of the sun. Longer without it negatively affecting. So here we are in the fall semester where we just came off of summer. So our melanocytes, for some of us, are still active and still present as we move into the winter months and we're not outside so much and we're not exposed to the sun. Those melanocytes become deactivated again or less active. We also have things called dendritic cells. Dendritic cells are sort of related to the body's immune system. They help the body ward off pathogens that might be present in the area. So, and finally, we have sensory nerve endings and tactile cells. So we have some nervous structures in the dermis. So if we touch something, the squishing of the layers of the epidermis down on this tactile cell will tell our nervous system that we're touching something, or something is touching us, or something is pressing on our skin. So the sensory structures are also found deep epidermis. And you also see there are also some other nervous structures in the dermis itself. So if you're going to see structures of the nervous system in the epidermis, they're going to be way down at the bottom, right? And really, for any of these types of cells, you're going to see them closer to the bottom of the epidermis. On this picture, the epidermis looks pretty thick, but you can see that really compared to the dermis, the epidermis is not very thick at all, but it offers a little bit of protection. So if we have a mild abrasion to the skin that is not deep at all, basically you're just scraping off the superficial levels of that layer of the stratum corneum, and you're okay. You ever scratch your skin to the point where it starts to bleed? Now you know that you've penetrated through the epidermis and you've penetrated the dermis, because that is where the vascular structures are. Okay, so that's kind of the difference. So if I take my fingernails and I kind of scrape my skin here, it's turning a little bit red, but I'm not bleeding by any means. So I'm just basically scraping off some layers of the epidermis. Go any deeper than that, and you'll start to see blood coming, because you're rupturing the blood vessels. Thank you for closing the door. Okay, let's clear the screen, and then we'll talk about these layers of the epidermis. All right, so on the basal layer, and I started talking about it, we have the stratum basal. This is the deepest epidermal layer. What I love about this picture is it gives you very good information about each layer. So it's one row of actively mitotic stem cells. What's mitosis? Does anybody remember what mitosis is? Cell reproduction. You take one cell, and then that cell becomes two, right? So that's what we see here at the stratum basal, except going this way, we're actually going the opposite. So what we're going to see is that this layer of cells is actively mitotic, which means that it will divide, and then one cell moves up, the other one stays behind. So you have this basal layer of mitotic stem cells that are constantly dividing off and pushing cells, as we see it, upward. Does that make sense? So the cells are constantly being sprouted off upward, and they make their way toward the surface. So the newly formed cells become part of the more superficial layers. So what they used to call this layer back in the day, the older term for this is called the stratum germinativum. It's a long term. Maybe that's why they got rid of it. But it's G-R-M-I-N-A-I-V-U. The base of that word is germinate. What does it mean to germinate? Take some seeds, put them in, you wrap them in a wet paper towel, and you put it in a plastic bag, and it starts to sprout. That's germination, sprouting, new growth, right? So that's why they call it the stratum germinativum. It's the layer that sprouts new growth. So if that helps you, by all means, use whatever works for you. Okay? Stratum germinativum. It's the germinating layer. It's the growing layer. Now, we're going to see a pattern here. When we talk about the skin, when we talk about the hair, when we talk about the nails, we're going to see the same pattern, that you have a base layer of cells that are actively mitotic, and then they reproduce and push cells superficially. Then in hair, nails, and also here in the epidermis. So just keep. Next, we have the stratum spinosum. Called the stratum spinosum because this is like the spiny layer. What's happening now is that these cells develop what they call intermediate filaments made of pre-keratin. So we're starting to set up the keratinization process here. These intermediate filaments kind of look like spines that are sticking out. So think of like a cactus, okay? So these filaments are kind of like sticking out. This is the spiny layer. The spiny layer, that's why they call it the stratum spinosum, the spiny layer. Notes they call it the prickly layer, whatever works for you. I think spiny works better because it works. However it works for you. Then we have the stratum granulosum. This is the granular layer. That's what they call it, the granulosum. What happens now, this is the transition stage. Before the stratum granulosum, the cells were still alive. When they get to the granulosum level, this is where the cells start to die off. So as they enter the granulosum, they're still alive, they're hanging on. By the time they get out of the granulosum, they're pretty much dead or almost dead. What we see here are the organelles are deteriorating, which means the cell is dying off. And now the cytoplasm is full of what we call lamellar granules, which release lipids. What waterproofs your skin. This is what, because remember, lipids and water don't mix. So this is where we see that the waterproofing abilities of your skin start to take place. And we see that these cells are full of granules, keratohyalin granules. Now they're becoming keratinized. All right, there's another layer in your skin called the stratum lucidum, which is between the stratum granulosum and the stratum corneum here. And we'll talk about where we see this and where we don't see this. But anyway, it says it's a clear layer, lucidum, lucid, clear, translucent. Okay, you can kind of see through it. It's kind of clear. Found only in thick skin and composed of dead keratinocytes. So by the time we get to this above the stratum granulosum, like I said, they're dead. And then we have the stratum corneum. It's what they call the horny layer because these cells are really flat. They're basically these sacs filled with keratin, and they kind of look like they have horns on the end of them. They kind of are basically flat keratinocytes. These are the cells that your body wants to slough off if anything scrapes your skin or scratches your skin. This is what your body wants to slough off. They're dead. They're not living. It's not going to hurt anything if they are sloughed off. Okay, so this brings us to our next learning point, and then we're going to stop and just do a little bit of discussion here. We have something called thin skin and something called thick skin, which you don't see. All right, so thin skin is what we just saw on the screen, which is skin that has 4 different layers. Epithelial, spinosum, granulosum, and corneum. Those 4 layers. Thick skin has 5 layers. Basal, next layer, which is the, what's that? Spinosum, the granulosum, then what? And then the corneum. Okay, those are the 5 layers. So thick skin is found in 2 areas on our bodies. 2 areas and 2 areas only. That would be the surfaces of the hands, palms of the hands, and like you're facing it right now. Thick skin, and then the bottoms of your feet. That's it. Those are the only places where we see thick skin. All the other locations on your body, thin skin. So thick skin only found in 2 areas, hands and feet. Those will have the 5 layers. The rest of your skin has 4 layers. Oddly enough, those are some of your areas of thick skin. You will not see any appendages of the skin. What I should say, you will see some. You won't see any hair. You know, we don't grow any hair on the surfaces of our hands and the soles of our feet. Hair is not present in the thick skin. But thick skin versus thin skin. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to partner up with someone and I want you to review what we've talked about. I want you to talk about the different cells of the epidermis, the different epidermis and the dermis. I want you to go through the layers of the epidermis and the difference between thick skin. I want you to just go through that for a few moments, and then we'll circle back. We'll talk about it again. I'll introduce a couple other things, and then we'll take a break. All right? So I'll give you about 5 minutes to go through what we've talked about already, and then after that time, we'll come back together. All right? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, so
Got the lottery. That's not
I'm kind of in trouble.
Yeah.
So that's how.
Did you two want to work together in a group?
I would
Can I
just
go
like
through it?
extract.
Travis, did you want to work with her together, so that way you guys can go through it together with someone else?
Above.
Helps to talk through.
All the other ones just kind of. Later. Basically.
Basically every.
Wrap it up and then we'll back together, we'll talk about what we discussed. Okay. All right, so what do we discuss? Got a blank slate here. What are we writing down? What did we talk about? Talk about the integumentary system in general. What do you know about it so far? Okay, 2 regions. Okay. Service. So far. Go ahead. Yeah.
The dermis.
4 layers. What kind of skin is that? Five layers. Okay. So we have thin skin, thick skin. Where do we see thick skin? Surface of, right? Off because we're. Okay, what else? Yeah, go ahead.
What's
Question is, what about a callus? What's happening with a callus? Wear and tear, so to speak, on the skin just ups the ante as far as the amount of cells that are being pushed toward the surface. So what you're basically doing is you're creating a thicker layer of, I would say, like the stratum lucidum and the stratum corneum. So those layers, due to the increased stresses that are placed upon the skin, those layers become thicker. That's essentially what it is. The callus is just more of those keratinocytes being produced, larger quantities, so that you have more layers available. Up the resistance to. In other conditions too, some hypokeratinization conditions where you see like on the elbows, where people have like really thick skin, like on their elbows and stuff like that. It's just abnormal, higher than normal level of keratinization and thickening. Okay, what else do we know about the epidermis and the dermis? Okay, so the cells. Protects against. Keratinocytes wouldn't do that, right? Those would be the keratinocytes, the waterproof, also, yeah, but we do have something that does protect the skin against UV rays, which are what are called. Protection. What other cells do we have in the epidermis? Yep, we have sensory. What else? What other cells?
Dendritic.
Yep. Dendritic cells. Yeah, they're part of the body's immune system. At the point where we really talk about the role of antigen present. Okay. All right, so we talked about question?
Yeah, Arthur.
Question was, are those of the cells that activate tissue repair? No, they're not involved directly in activating the tissue repair. That's done more through inflammatory chemicals from the damaged tissue cells. Dendritic cells are more responsible, I'll try to summarize it. The dendritic cells are more responsible for identifying pathogens and letting the body's immune system know of the pathogens and what to do. Okay, what about the keratinocytes? We said we had 4 or 5 layers. What are those layers? And stratum corneum, right? Okay. So tell me about the stratum basale. What? Mitotic, which means what? Okay. What about the stratum spinosum? All right, so what that is that the stratum spinosum is the spiny layer. But think of a cactus. How a cactus has, what did you say? Scales to protect it, so like it's the protective layer because the protective cells are located there. Great way to come about it. That'll stick in your memory really well. Okay, the stratum granulosum. What about the granulosum? Why do they call it granulosum? Because it's the what layer? Okay. Granular layer. So what are the granules? What are they made up of? Yeah, they're like keratin hyaline granules. So what do those keratin hyaline granules do? One unique thing about this, or one thing starts at this layer. Start to die, yep. What else? What characteristic of your skin starts here? The waterproofing, yeah, because these granules are waterproof. Waterproof. Waterproofing starts here. Cells start to die off. By the time they enter the granulosum, they're still a little bit alive. By the time they get to the end of the top layer of the granulosum, the superficial layer. So then basically the organelles are replaced with these granules. Okay, the stratum lucidum. Tell me a little bit about the stratum lucidum.
Transparent.
Yeah, it's kind of transparent, yes. Hair grows in the area of the stratum lucidum, right? Stratum lucidum, the thick skin, no hair. What else? Only found in hands and feet. Find as what kind of skin?
Okay.
Else? Well, the superficial layer, the stratum corneum.
It's all dead cells.
All dead cells. Sacs of keratin, right? Just basically keratinous sacs of tissue. Thickest layer. Stratum corneum is the thickest layer. Good review. You did a nice job with that. Is that helpful? Good. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to move on and let's talk a little bit about the dermis now. So if you're following along, we're on page 5, letter D. So the dermis, as it says, is composed of strong, flexible, connective tissue, well supplied with blood vessels, nerves, lymphatic vessels. Made up of 2 layers, the superficial papillary layer that forms the dermal papilla, which gives rise to fingerprints. And then we have the deeper layer, which is 80% of the thickness of the dermis, which is called the reticular layer. Forms cleavage and flexure lines. All right, so this picture can be a little bit confusing when we look at it. They're trying to show you the difference between the epidermis and the dermis. We don't have the entirety of the dermis here either. But anything that's purple here is the epidermis. What we're seeing here is kind of like a division between colors, seeing a division between non-living areas. So like this darker purple region here, that's the layers that are essentially alive. We get that transitional layer, which is the stratum granulosum, which is right here. And then above that, this light purple is pretty much the stratum corneum. The 2 colors of purple still are showing the epidermis. So we get to this layer here, the papillary layer of the dermis. It's the superficial part. So like this is where you see the dermal papilla. Let's see. Here's your first term, then we'll go back to the picture to show it to you. First term is the term dermis. Everyone get that? All right, so on this picture, figure 5.1, you can see here they're kind of showing these little bumps. See them here? Like kind of like this bumpy appearance. This is the what we call the papillary layer. So if you look at your fingerprints and so forth, that's the foundation for that really is the dermal. The papillary layer of those dermal papilla. So if you think dermal papilla, think of fingerprints, that kind of thing. Okay, that's the papillary region. That's what they're showing here, the fingerprints. Okay, but then we also have what are called cleavage lines, and one of the most identifiable cleavage lines or flexure lines would be looking at. Those are formed by the deeper region, the reticular layer of the dermis. So those are lines that are there that run very deep in the skin, and they're always there. The body naturally has certain cleavage or flexure lines. This place, the seam, is where things come together. So like the creases, chest, and so forth, lines in your face and so forth. So people who are performing surgery, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll strategically make incisions to the skin along those flexure lines so that they're less noticeable. Shoulder surgery, if you have a surgeon who does exceptional work, what they'll do when they make the incision in the shoulder, they'll look for a place that's along a kind of like a crease or a flexure line, so that way it's not very noticeable because there's already a crease or a line there in the first place. That kind of idea. Looking at this picture, also, as we were saying before, you'll find that there are different things that are in the dermis. So the reticular layer is where you're going to find the hair. You're going to find nerve endings here, part of the nervous system. Vascular structures are found in this region as well. So when we look at the dermis, we see a little bit of areolar tissue and dense irregular connective tissue that's closer to the epidermis. So the papillary layer is a little bit more flexible, a little bit more pliable, a little bit softer. And then we get to the reticular layer, which makes up most of the dermis. And that is going to be mostly that dense, irregular connective tissue. Dense, irregular connective tissue is made up of what kind of fibers primarily? Nope. Not mainly reticular. I might see some reticular. Dense, irregular connective tissue. Think about what it does. What is dense, irregular connective? What's a characteristic quality of dense, irregular connective tissue? What about leather? Because leather is the dermis, essentially, of the cow or whatever animal that you're getting leather from. Leather, what's leather? Tough and durable. So what kind of fibers are tough and durable? Collagen, you got it. A great dermis story. I'll leave it with you before we take a break. A lot of fun. All right, so a fun dermis story. This is always a fun one. I love telling this story. So you think of leather being the animal, how it's really tough and durable. Yeah, they hides, they do things too. They treat. Lasts a long time. When we were dissecting cadavers, chiropractic school, we were dissecting cadavers, and one of the first areas of the body that we dissected was the back, because we were studying the spine. So what we would do is we would have the cadavers turned face down, so we would just see the backs. And what we would do is we would make an incision down the middle of the back, and then we would make horizontal incisions like around the shoulder blades and then a little bit lower. And so then you basically have these flaps of skin that you could pull away so you could start to get to the deeper layers, which are the muscle, which we wanted to see because we want to see the back muscles and so forth. So what we had to do basically is we had to skin the cadaver. So we had to make those incisions, and then we had to grab onto the skin and start separating that subcutaneous layer from the muscle. And so you'd be pulling on the skin and pulling it up and kind of scraping it with a scissors, or some people use a scalpel, but a blunt end of a scissors works much better. Well, because there's a lot of fat on that subcutaneous layer, it was slippery, and you're wearing these latex gloves, or the gloves, so that you're not touching the cadaver. So as you're pulling, it kind of slips a little bit easier. So what they told us to do was or what we devised as a strategy, is that we started cutting, like, you call them like buttonholes. So what we do is we cut a buttonhole little slit in the skin, and then we'd stick our finger through that hole, and then we pull on the skin because now we had a nice firm grip on it, and then we just kind of like leather, it's that's how thick. I mean, that the skin on the back is, a good centimeter thick in some areas. So it's think about leather. I mean, it's very thick, it's very durable. So our skin is very thick and very durable, and that dermis is very thick and durable, and that quality of the skin, of the dermis being very tough and durable, comes from those collagen fibers. Dense, irregular connective tissue, withstanding tension in any direction. That's why your skin is extremely hard to tear or rip open, because you have that dense, irregular connective tissue that withstands tension in multiple directions. So when you think of leather and you look at leather, think dermis, think dense, irregular connective tissue, collagen fibers. That's what it is. All right, so we'll take 10 and we'll come back at about 5 after 10, and then we'll continue talking about some of the appendages of the skin. All right, we're back, ready to roll. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna focus on what we call the appendages of the skin. And these are simply the things that stick out of the skin. Now, what we're gonna see with all these is that they all have their unique characteristics and qualities, but at the same time, they're very similar. All right, so let's talk about what we already know about the epidermis, because the structures of, or the appendages of the skin are very similar to the epidermis. So tell me about the cells of the epidermis. I don't care about like that they're epithelial tissues, but tell me the characteristic or quality of the epithelial tissues in the epidermis. What can you tell me about them? Primarily composed of what? What?
Dead tissue.
Dead tissue containing what?
Keratin.
Keratin, yes. So these are going to be keratinocytes or keratinocytes. So the cells of hair, the cells of the nails are made up of the same type of material as the epidermis. Got it? Like a rhinoceros horn. Horn of a rhinoceros, made up of keratinocytes. So the rhinos, to get this, to get the keratinocytes, the horn of the rhinoceros, and not realizing it's just the same thing. All right, so we've got the keratinocytes that make up the hair and the nails. Tell me about the basal layer, the stratum basal of the epidermis. What's going on at the stratum basal? Germination, yes?
Is that in that
Huh?
Is that like where it's anchored down?
Well, it's that basal layer, yep, and what's happening at the basal layer? Producing cells, is divided, okay? So instead of a stratum basal, when it comes to hair and nails, we have something called a matrix. We have a nail matrix, we have a hair matrix, but it does the same thing. It's anchored to the layers below, yes? And it also gives off new cells, called what? Keratinocytes, okay? So what's going to happen is the cells are going to start at the matrix and work their way outward from the matrix. Whether it's outward and upward, like hair, or it's just straight outward, like a nail, all right? You see the similarities between the three? Epidermis, hair, nails. Keratinocytes. We have the actively mitotic area called the stratum basal for the epidermis, also called the matrix in the hair and nails. Got it? If you get that, then you get hair and nails for the most part. So by the time the nail gets to the end where you're cutting the nail, what are the characteristics and qualities of that nail? Why doesn't it hurt when you cut it? Dead. Keratinocytes. Who have hair when you cut your hair? What is it? It comes off, right? It doesn't hurt. Kids are afraid of getting their hair cut, because they think it's going to hurt. It doesn't hurt. Why? Because the cells are dead keratinocytes. See? So similarities, all right? So just look for the similarities. Make it easy on you. So let's start off with the hairs. I hit the space. I didn't know that mutes the microphone. So now I know. All right. All right, so looking at, let's go back to this picture first. Looking at this picture, you can see that the hairs originate in the dermis. We see that. Now, there are different types of hairs for the body. Reference to it? Yeah, page 6, types and growth of hair. You get a pale hair, fine vellus hairs, longer, more coarse terminal hairs. So we see different types of hair. Did you know that on a human being, that humans actually have more hair on their bodies than chimpanzees do? Know that? Actually, humans are hairier than chimpanzees, but the difference is that we have a lot of hair that is very pale hair or fine hair, vellus hair, called peach fuzz. See? So across our face, we actually have tons of hair on our face, but we don't see it because it's made up of this really fine hair that you can't see. Babies, exactly, exactly. We can see that, so that peach fuzz, that's a type of hair. And then we have the coarse hair, like, for men, it's hormone driven, but, they grow the facial hair, the beard, the mustache. That's more coarse hair. It keeps growing and growing and growing. Hair in our heads. We also have hair that grows to a certain length and then stops growing. So you think of your eyelashes or your eyebrows. It's coarse hair, but it grows only to a certain length and it stops growing. So different types of hair on the body. Thinking about, well, let's go. Let's follow along in the notes. Otherwise, we're getting ahead of ourselves. All right. So what you see here on this picture, and going. On this picture, the root of the hair. Okay, so that you can see it originates inside the dermis. If you do a cutaway of the hair, you can see that we have a vascular inlet and outlet to the hair. So it's got a vascular component. Guess what resides very close to the blood supply? Think. What are the characteristics? What do we talk about with hair? That deep layer, what is it called? Matrix, you got it. So the matrix resides very close to the blood supply because that's what's giving it the oxygen and the nutrients to grow new cells. Very nice. Good job. Here we are. So here's the matrix right here. We also have melanocytes, as you can see here. So the main area that I want you to focus on is the matrix. The matrix is going to reproduce, push off more cells, and those cells are going to grow outwards, upwards. And they're going to differentiate into different aspects and different parts of the hair structure. So if we're looking at this picture down here, you can see that in the hair root, we have something called the cuticle. We have the cortex, which is an inner region. Then we have the medulla, which is, outer region. The cortex is here. Medulla is kind of this white area. So we have different types of hair cells. They're all keratinocytes, but they give the hair its structure and its shape and its characteristics. Hair wouldn't be the way it is and grow the way it does and look the way it does if it wasn't for these differentiated areas of the keratinocytes. But they're all made up of keratin. Then we have the root sheath, which kind of gives it, or I should say the follicle wall, which gives the hair like its strength and its ability to basically grow upward and kind of hold its shape upward and upward. And so that follicle wall kind of has this connective tissue sheath around it. And then deep to that, we have what's called the glassy membrane and the epithelial root sheath, and then the external root sheath, internal root sheath. To me, that's not majorly significant. What I want you to understand is that hair has an actively mitotic area called the matrix, and the matrix divides and gives off cells called, keratinocytes or keratinocytes, and they grow outward and upward and then eventually stick out the surface of the skin. That's basically all I want you to know, okay? If you can understand that, you're good. You're good on hair, okay? I don't expect you to know all the different parts of the hair and the follicle and the cuticle and the root. Cross section through the hair, then you'll see the thick rows of keratinocytes. But by the time it makes its way to the surface of the skin, those cells are no longer living. They've died off and they've been replaced. Organelles have been replaced with keratin, like the epidermis. What we do see connected to the kind of like the root of the hair, as it were, in some areas, are called erector pili muscles. And so what happens is when the body's nervous system activates the erector pili, it's going to shorten and it's going to pull the root of the hair this way, causing the shaft to stand straight up. In some animals, they use this for intimidation factors. So like when they are confronted with a threat, they can puff out the hair on their back and make themselves look bigger. I don't know about the porcupine if they use erector pili, but I'm guessing it's somewhat similar to that. I'm not sure though the actual mechanism. Cat, yes, cat would be a great example of that, yes. So it's going to cause the hair to stand on end. This mechanism isn't very useful to us. It doesn't really work with us. Most of the time what happens is the hair will stand up on end, but that's kind of related to cold temperatures. That's what we call the goosebumps. That's the erector pili muscle that's working, but we don't have a lot of hair. You know, it depends if, like I have hairy arms, but some people don't have as hairy arms as I do. So, you know, when you get the goosebumps, you just see the goosebumps. You don't really see the hair on the arm. But anyway, erector pili performs that function. In us, the reason why we get goosebumps or so forth, or something like that, what we call goosebumps, goose pimples, whatever you call it, is to try to conserve heat. So by raising the skin up into those little bumps that hopefully trap the heat around those bumps or areas or whatever. Not a very effective means of retaining heat. Moving over to the nails. Looking at the nails. Here we have a nail matrix, which is made up of what? Mitotic cells. And guess what? As those cells grow and move their way out, what happens to them? Keratinocytes or keratinocytes, they die off. So when you cut your nail at the end, the free edge, it doesn't hurt. All right, some aspects of the nails we see here called the cuticle, called the eponychium. We have this little moon-shaped structure here, the white part of the nail, that's called the lunule, called the lunula. It's like the moon. Proximal nail fold, which is proximal to the cuticle itself. We have lateral nail folds here for hangnails, what we call hangnails. Got the actual body of the nail that lays on top of the nail bed. And then we have the free edge of the nail. All right, so you can see the commonalities between hair and nails. Epidermis. Talking a little bit more about hair. I forgot on page 6 they talk about hair thinning and baldness. After age 40, in most people, their hair does thin out somewhat. In men, it can also be genetically predisposed and hormonally driven. People like me who have done through genetics. If you're going to take advanced A&P, I'll walk you through the genetics of belt pattern baldness and how that's what you call a sex. But here's your second term, matrix, in case you didn't get it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about sweat glands. There's different types of sweat glands, but when we think about what sweat does for our bodies, all this sweat, what's the function of sweat? What does sweat do for us? We start,
Helps cool.
yeah, it helps cool us down. So what happens is sweat is deposited at the surface of the skin, and then through evaporation, the air will come along and evaporate that sweat, cooling down the surface of the skin. It's a cooling mechanism. Works really well if you have low humidity. If you have high humidity, it doesn't work so well because it doesn't evaporate as well. Without running in 90-degree weather with high humidity, it doesn't work very well. All right, so anyway, so I'm introducing you to one of the sweat glands, which are called the eccrine sweat glands, which you see here on the screen. We also call these merocrine sweat glands. a gland, because this is a gland, what kind of epithelial tissue is this primarily made of? What? Not adipose. Nope. Glands, squishy.
Squams.
Cuboidal, you got it. So this is probably some sort of cuboidal cell, and you can kind of see them here. Looks like stratified if you look at this gland. But nevertheless, it's going to be a cuboidal epithelial type. Eccrine gland. You can see that they originate in the dermis here, and then they have a little duct that carries the secretion of the sweat gland to the surface of the skin, called the sweat pore. Stands alone. What we call this is a true sweat gland, and we see this located throughout the entire body, and it can be predominant, or I should say, more predominant in certain areas. So, forehead, sometimes the hand, sometimes it depends on the person to person. A little lab activity. Back when I used to have students come to lab, it was an activity where we looked at people's distribution of sweat glands. So we take little pieces of paper and put iodine on them, and then we put it on the forehead, on the hands, on the feet, on the leg, on the arm, and we just let it sit for a while. And then after that certain time, we take it off and we look at which areas of the body had more sweat glands. And it was funny because it depended on the individual. So some people had more sweat glands on their forehead than any place else in the body. The distribution was more concentrated there. Some people it was on the front of their leg. Some people it was on their hands or the feet. Because what we determined is that there's no predictor. Some people have sweatier hands than others. Some people have sweatier foreheads than others. But the eccrine sweat glands are active at birth. So they're immediately active. They're working all the time. So think of the little babies. If you've ever been around young babies, they're sleeping. Summertime, it's warm. They got little beads of sweat on their nose, right? Those eccrine sweat glands are already working. Or they wake up with a full head of wet hair. Yeah, those are the eccrine sweat glands working. That's true sweat. That's sweat that's designed to cool you down, okay? But then we have another type of sweat gland, which is called the apocrine sweat gland. And the apocrine sweat gland is confined to certain areas of the body. And these are areas of the body that grow hair in response to the sex hormones becoming prevalent in the body during puberty. So during puberty, you start to see the growth of hair in the axillary and anal genital areas. So these are the areas where you're going to see the apocrine sweat glands. And just like the growth of hair begins in those areas when we reach puberty, also see that the apocrine sweat glands become active at that same time. So this is why deodorant was invented, to help neutralize the side effects of the secretions of the apocrine sweat gland. That's why, when children start to get in that adolescent period, when they're nearing puberty or they're hitting puberty, that's when they start to give off a body odor, okay? Because sweat glands are starting to come alive. In other animals, their nasal and smelling abilities work different than ours. Those are like scent glands. Those are kind of like our scent glands. They give off a secretion. To us, doesn't smell very pleasant. We're like, God, you stink, right? But to other animals, that's an important secretion. That's an important part of their social behavior. So other animals will use the secretions of the apocrine sweat glands as an indicator of activity and so forth. So they do produce their own sweat, but it's a little bit different. It's got a protein and fat in it as well as other things. Okay, so those are the apocrine sweat glands. They're associated with hair in the genital and the axillary regions. Then we also have another type of sweat gland, which we would never associate with sweat glands, but it's true. Actually, another two. One is the ceruminous gland, top of page 7. These are modified apocrine glands that are found in the ear. They produce a specialized type of secretion called earwax. That's the ceruminous glands, and that earwax is called cerumen. That at the top of page 7. We also have some modified sweat glands called mammary glands, which develop in the female gender with the onset of the sex hormones being secreted, development of the mammary glands. So babies who drink milk are just, sweat suckers, I call it, right? Breast milk is a modified form of sweat, believe it or not. Wonderful, right? So there you go. And then we have another type of gland, which is not a sweat gland, and we see it here on the screen. It's called a sebaceous gland. This is more of an oil gland. So the sebaceous or oil glands, you can have a direct relationship with the hair. So the sebaceous glands secrete this oily secretion. That oily secretion is, or I should say it gets distributed along the shaft of the hair and also at the surface of the skin where the hair comes out of the skin. And the function of the oil gland is to help soften the skin and kind of condition the skin. So it's a natural skin conditioner, natural skin protectant. It protects the skin. It's kind of like an acidic type of oily secretion. So it's antimicrobial in many ways. Where we do not see the oil glands, oddly enough, is in the area. And the secretion of the sebaceous glands is stimulated by hormones. All right, just one more thing that we're going to talk about, and then we'll kind of go back and review a lot of different things that we've talked about, not only this week, but last week. Let's talk about the functions of the integumentary system. Oh, I want to make sure you get you to the third term. Third term is pore. All right, so let's look at some functions of the skin. Protection. It says in notes, chemical barriers. So inhibiting bacterial growth. We just talked about this. The secretion of the sebaceous gland. Protection. Antimicrobial. Keeps pathogens away from the skin or kills off pathogens. Deters them. Also melanin, for example, protects the body from ultraviolet damage. We also have physical and mechanical barriers. So just because we have the skin there, someone coughs or sneezes on your skin, we wash that off. The pathogen doesn't enter our body. So it's an actual physical barrier. We also have biological barriers like the dendritic cells. We talked about a little bit, macrophages in the dermis. And DNA can help convert ultraviolet radiation into dissipated. Some examples of what we call biological barriers. We also talked the first week of class how the skin kind of keeps the internal body temperature up. So it's separating the internal from the external environment. So helping maintain body temperature, both through retaining heat and also helping us eliminate heat or decrease the temperature of the body through sweating and so forth. We also sense things through the skin. So if something is hot, cold, painful, someone touches us, pressure, anything like that. So we have information from the external environment that comes to the nervous system through the skin. That's another important function of the skin, cutaneous sensation. We also metabolize vitamin D through the skin when we expose our skin to sunlight. We also have a blood reservoir. Actually, 5% of your body's blood at any given time is found in the skin. Blood reservoir, which is quite a bit of blood. You can also eliminate wastes through the skin as well. So, but not only do we get rid of the sweat, but we also can get rid of waste. All right, so those are the functions of the skin. And I just want to talk very quickly about some static imbalances of the skin, which we call it, or a lot about that here. But here are some examples of skin cancer. We have basal cell carcinoma. So what happens is we're affecting the cells of the stratum basale. That's what they call it, basal cell carcinoma. We have squamous cell carcinoma. Comes from the stratum spinosum, and it can grow very rapidly if not removed. And then we have melanoma, which is the deadliest type because it travels very quickly and what we call a malignant melanoma. So the ABCs of yeah, you got it. Thank you. That was it. So you've heard of these already. Okay, maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Okay, let's go
They're
back.
in.
Oh, they're near. Well, that's great. So they're in the notes. Good. Okay, so what are the ABCs of cancer? What's the first one?
Asymmetry.
Yeah, asymmetry. So if you look at something, this is trying to determine whether something might be dangerous or not dangerous. So you're asking yourself, okay, I've got something on my skin. Is it dangerous or not dangerous? Okay, you kind of determine this. So asymmetry. So if you have something that's relatively round, probably less harmful than something that is like, okay, see how we lack symmetry here? So that's asymmetry. This probably is going to be more harmful or require getting looked at before this one necessarily. We don't see a lot of symmetry. This is asymmetric. Okay, this one too. Can you see how this is asymmetric?
Mhm.
Yeah. This one, pretty symmetric, right? Pretty circular. All right. So that first one, basal cell, might pass the asymmetry. Okay, next one is what? B for
Border.
border. So border, look at the border. Is it easy to tell where it begins or ends? Are you able to very, very easily distinguish where this is arising? If it's a well-defined bump on the skin, you can tell there's a pretty well-defined border on this one. Yeah, kind of fuzzy borders here. It's kind of hard to tell where it begins or ends. See that? Or you can make it up, but boy, that just looks nasty, right? Okay, so border. So does it have well-defined borders and then color? Last thing. What does it say about color? Color in there?
No, just.
Okay, color. So looking at the color, what's the pigmentation? Does it carry with it a pigmentation? Definitely this one, not so much this one. But of the three, this is probably the one that's the least progressive, the least harmful. It'll hang out for a while and it won't really that one's pretty localized. What you're looking for is, that the cancer going to spread? Is it going to move to different parts of the body? If it's asymmetric, if it's hard to define the borders and it's got a different color than the rest of your skin, chances are that that's going to be a more rapidly moving and traveling type of cancer. So kind of a story for me that I have. It's not a cancer story by any means, but kind of using the ABCs. I should get it. I have a picture. So I should bring the picture sometime. So if you can even see it on the camera. See, I have like a little divot here in my head. I'm trying to catch it in the light. You can see I have a little divot in my head there. Well, when I was a little kid, I got chickenpox. Did all of you have chickenpox? Haven't? Never had it? All right. You ever get vaccinated for chickenpox or anything? No. Never had it. So nowadays, kids get vaccinated, and you say, well, you got a shot for chickenpox. What's a chickenpox? Well, it's kind of like us. When our generation, for the most part, us sitting in here, we don't get the measles or the mumps, right? Right? But our parents got the mumps. You know, everybody got the mumps. Kind of like everybody got chickenpox. You know, back in the day. I had chickenpox, and I had one big pox right here on my head. It was a big scab. It grew, and then it. I remember waking up in the middle of the night with this big burning, you know, sensation, really painful. Well, that sucker came off in the middle of the night. So there I was with this nice ripped off scab, you know, on my head. So for years, I always had this divot in my head like that. Always. And then when I was going through chiropractic school, all of a sudden, I didn't notice that the divot was gone necessarily, but I noticed that I had a bump on my head. Bump, and then it just grew, but then it stopped growing. It just was this bump right here in my head. And it just was more annoying than anything, because every time I look in the mirror, I'd see this stupid bump on my head, and I would watch it, you know, asymmetry, border, color. It was the same color as the rest of my skin, had a well-defined border. It was round, so it wasn't scary to me. I'm like, well, it's probably nothing harmful. But I just got sick of dealing with it. So finally I went to a dermatologist, and what it was is it was a cyst. It was just a cyst that grew from one of the layers of my epidermis into this pocket. And so he said, well, I can take care of it for you right here. I'm like, okay, yes, because I don't like needles. I don't like blood. I don't like any of this stuff. So you got me here. So let's take care of it because I don't want to come back. So then he took it out. And when he took it out, he showed it to me. It looked just like a cherry pit. Except it was soft. And then he cut it open. And it looked like, you know, brown mustard in there. It was just... Anyway, and what happened was, and I figured, after he did that and after it healed, I'm like, oh, there's that divot again in my head. So it must have been something with the chicken pox and the scar. It must have done something to one of my hair follicles, and it was actually a hair follicle that had grown into the cyst. It was a follicular type of cyst or whatever. But again, you know, using the ABCs, you can kind of look at something and say, okay, is this something that requires looking into? Sometimes you'll see a person who has this nasty, you know, brown mark, and it's like jagged and it's got a different color, and you're thinking, boy, I hope you're getting that looked at, because if you ever see that on a loved one or a family member, you notice asymmetry, border, and color, think of that ABC and think about that. And if you notice someone that has something that looks kind of scary, talk to them about it, because it may require getting looked at. It's a lot easier to cut something out of your skin and be done with it than to wait until it's all over and then it kills you. If you're afraid of dying, I guess. Well, one way or the other, they don't, you know, they die or they don't die, whatever. But if they're concerned about dying, and you're concerned about them dying, then just talk to them. All right. Okay, so talking about burns. The way that they estimate the severity of a burn is looking at the rule of nines. So what they do is they divide your body's surface area into percentage of nines. So like, for example, each of your lower extremity is your lower extremity, that's this. Okay, each of your body, your lower extremities is a 9%. Trunk is 18%. Calculation of the 9. If you divide 9 into 2, you get 4.5. So that's each upper extremity, half of a 9. So you kind of use this rule of nines for determining the amount of damage to the body. One of the things you have to worry about with a severe burn is that you lose a lot of fluids, dehydration, and it throws off your electrolytes. So, okay, so if you look at this one, a first-degree burn kind of just stays at the surface, like within the epidermis. If it penetrates down into the dermis, then you've got what's called a second-degree burn. A full thickness, like you really cooked your leg, then it's a... I also have a weak stomach when it comes to that stuff. Strong stomachs. I don't. I was helping teach a high school class a couple of years ago that I was team teaching with at the high school. She loved the blood and guts stuff. And she loved looking at videos of surgeries and stuff like that. I don't like that. So one day, and I told her this, I said, so one day she comes to me and says, I found a great video, because we were talking about the reconstruction. I found a video on a vasectomy. I'm like, I don't think I can watch this. She goes, oh, don't worry, it's bloodless, there's no, I'm like, okay, I'll give it a shot. So here we are, I'm sitting in the front of the classroom, she's sitting with me, and there's this. And yeah, I started watching the video, and scissors that's kind of bent like this, and then they jab it in the scrotum, and they start separating it, and then fishing around, and I'm like, and I could just feel like the blood leaving my head, my face. And they're all looking at me, and they're like wondering what's going to happen to me. I guess I was like white as a ghost, and I just almost passed out right there. But I just put my head down, grabbed a drink of water. And after it was over, I told the teacher, I said, I told you, I cannot watch this stuff. So anytime she showed us surgery, I'd just go walk in the hall. Because I'm just like, I would not be a good nursing student. I would not be a good nurse. I can deal with it if someone got their arm chopped off and I had to put a tourniquet on and help them like right there, something nasty. I can deal with it. But when I'm watching like a video of it, there's a part of me that relates to it. So it's kind of like I was getting a vasectomy right there in front of the class. So it was nasty. So anyway, don't make me watch any videos and we'll be okay. So let's go back and let's talk about some of the things that we discussed last time we were together. So let's go back and talk about tissues, just review. So what are the different types of tissues of the body? 4 main types. What have we got? Nervous. Epithelial. Muscle and connective. Great. What are the types of epithelial tissue? We have a single layer, which is called simple, more than one layer, which is called stratified. And we have 3 main types. So what are the shapes? Squamous, cuboidal, columnar. Then we have the 2 outliers. Pseudostratified and transitional. Very good. Connective tissues. Got the subcategories. So we had, for example, I'll give you the first one. Loose connective tissue. What's another one? Dense. What's another one? Cartilage. Bone. Blood. Okay, so those are the 5 subcategories. So give me the types of loose connective tissue. They go in 3. Areolar, adipose, and reticular. Great. 3 dense connective tissues. We have dense. Yep, dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. Very good. Okay, 3 types of cartilage. Hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Great. Then we have bone and blood. Good. Muscle. 3 types of muscle tissue. Skeletal, cardiac, smooth. What's the similarity between the cardiac and skeletal? Oh,
Wait, no, never mind.
appearance. Smooth and cardiac is involuntary. So between cardiac and skeletal, what's the similarity? Why are they called smooth muscle? Smooth muscle. Lacks what? Striations, the stripes. So skeletal and cardiac have the striations or stripes. Except what's the difference between skeletal and cardiac besides that one's involuntary, one's not? Yeah, short branch cells in cardiac, and then the skeletal muscle is what? Long, cylindrical, very organized, right? Good. Okay, good. And then we have nervous. Good. Thanks. All right. So tell me some functions of the skin. What are some of the functions of the skin? Keeps it cool. Temperature regulation. What else? Blood reservoir. Yes. What else? Protection from what? Pathogens is one. Yep. What else? What's that?
Abrasion.
Yes, abrasion. Protects you from abrasion. What else? What else does it protect you? On a hot summer day.
UV.
Yeah, ultraviolet. You Jab yourself with a pin. What else does it protect you from? So it's your body's ability to pathogens or neutralize pathogens, but also if someone coughs or sneezes on your hand or your skin, you're also protected there, mechanical barrier, right? Good. And think about the chemical barrier, also the secretions of the skin, right? So like the sebaceous secretions, acid and adipose type of secretion helps as a antimicrobial agent. Okay, what's another function of skin? Wastes. You got it. What else? Yep, metabolizes vitamin D. Do we forget anything else? Talk about temperature, protection, function.
Sensory.
Yep, that's right, sensory. So sensory function, letting you know what's going on in the external environment. Yes, absolutely, great. What are the ABCs of skin cancer? A is what?
Asymmetry.
What? Yeah, if it's not round, or if it doesn't look the same on the right versus the left, right? If it's, we're symmetrical, right?
Yeah.
Left and right look pretty much the same. Okay, so asymmetry, what's the B?
Border.
Border. A regular, we're looking for a regular, I should say, a well-defined border versus a non-well-defined border. Does it kind of blend into the skin color, or is it a hard border that you can see a definite difference between where it begins and ends? Yes. Have a well-defined border. What's the C? Color. So looking for something that's different, a different color than the skin. Does it for a different color? Yes. Diameter. Oh, okay. Where are you seeing this in notes? Oh, yeah, there it is. Diameter. ABCD. Diameter. 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 So the size. Very small, as opposed to like that. Obviously, the larger the diameter, the more you want to take a look at that. Roundness. So how wide is it on the skin? So how big is the spot? Is it size circle, or is it, size of a golf ball? Yeah.
We usually say if it.
Yes, if it's bigger than a pencil eraser. Yeah, to get it looked at, yeah. That was the one thing that concerned me with the one on my head, because it was big, but it didn't grow. It just was like that, and then it never. So how are hair and nails similar to an epidermis? They're called a what?
Matrix.
A matrix. And what does the matrix do? Yeah, reproduces cells up and toward the periphery of the body, or the external body. Yep. Tell me the different types of, what are the different types of glands in the body? Eccrine. Eccrine? What were you saying? Close. We're right. We're right. We're learning. So eccrine, which is, what would we consider that? Sweat gland. Secretes true sweat. So it's designed to, or it's supposed to help you lower your body temperature. So tell me a little bit about them. When do they become active? Yeah, the day you're born. They're active at birth. Yeah. Where are they located? Everywhere. Yeah. Okay. What's another type of gland? Apocrine sweat glands. So tell me about those. They become active at puberty. Related to, where are they located? Axillary and anal genital areas. Yep, the same areas that start growing hair or hair growth in those areas during the onset. All right. Body odor, think body odor, apocrine, right? Okay, what are the other types of glands? Other modified sweat glands.
Mammary.
Mammary is one, yep. And what's the other one in the back? Yeah, the ceruminous. That's a fun one, right? The ceruminous. What?
You're right.
Hey, what's the other type of gland? Not the sweat gland, but the sebaceous gland, which secretes oily secretion, right? Tell me about those. How are those different than the eccrine sweat glands, for example? Other things besides sweat, they have like an oily secretion, microbial, right?
Hair function.
Function is different than trying to cool down the body. What is their function related to? Protection, softening the skin. Tell me about the difference between where the gland empties out to this gland versus an eccrine. Yes, a sebaceous gland is associated with a hair follicle, whereas the eccrine sweat gland is not necessarily. It's just great. Oh, something I didn't talk about, the skin color. Skin color, this is on toward the bottom of page 5, letter E. It says skin color is determined by 3 pigments, melanin, keratins, and hemoglobin. So melanin, we know melanin because if you go out in the sun and you spend some time out in the sun, or people who have darker skin, their skin it gives you a skin and brown, like a brownish color. So people who have a large degree of melanin in their skin, either by their genetics, they're going to have, or some other virtue, they're going to have like brown skin. So melanin gives your skin a brownish. Okay, keratin. That have a lot of beta carotene in it. Oranges, yep. What are some foods that have a lot of beta carotene? Carrots, sweet potato. What color do you think the carotenes are going to color your skin? He's no longer living anymore, but he used to. Vitamin shop where he would sell like vitamins and supplements and stuff like that. A lot of vitamin A. Sometimes you come in and his skin was like, take a lot of vitamin A, your skin can turn it orange. Beta carotene derivative, or beta carotene is like a vitamin A derivative. So it gives your skin like an orangish color. Hemoglobin. Where have you heard about hemoglobin? Maybe you have. If you've heard of hemoglobin, what?
Is it in your blood?
It's in your blood, yeah. It's the oxygen, carbon dioxide, but the oxygen carrying molecule of your blood, which gives your blood a reddish color. Those are the 3 pigments that are going to determine your skin color for the most part. Okay, so tell me about the dermis. The dermis is made up of 2 regions. What are the 2 regions? Papillary is one. Is that more superficial or deep? Superficial. Then we have the deeper layer of the dermis. Yeah. So fingerprints, for the most part, come from which region? Papillary. The creases in your hand. Got it. Good. What else are you going to find in the dermis? Structures are in the dermis. Hair, nails originate in the dermis. What else? Sweat glands. What else? Cut your skin deep enough, it starts to bleed. Why? There are blood vessels in there, and it hurts. Why? Yeah, because you have nerve endings in the skin. Oh, so those are some of the structures that we find in the dermis. And what kind of tissue primarily makes up the dermis? Dense, irregular connective tissue for the most part. Other tissue types, but that the skin, the dermis of the skin is very what? What's the characteristic and quality? Tough, durable. Yeah, leather, right? Holes in cadavers, backs. Cadavers, there you go. All right. Layers of the epidermis. What are the layers of the epidermis? There's the stratum, cell, and what does it do? Cell division. The next layer up is the stratum spinosum, the spiny layer, the prickly layer. Section, yes. Third layer, stratum spinosum, called the what layer? Granular layer, because you have the keratin granules that are starting to form. This is what makes the cell more what? Waterproof. Yep, you got it. Then the next layer up in thick skin would be the stratum lucidum. And then the final layer, the most superficial layer, stratum corneum. You got it. Again. So where do the cells die? What layer? Stratum granulosum, where do the cells die? What are some other cells that are found in the epidermis? We talked about keratinocytes. What else? Melanocytes. What else? Dendritic cells and tactile cells, like the Merkel cells that detect like touch, pressure, so forth. Yeah, hands-on, tactile learning. There you go. All right, did a great job. It looks like you remember a lot from the tissues, so we're good too. What questions do you have for me? Good? Yes, question.
Do any
You're asking if the other cells, like the melanocytes, the tactile cells, and the dendritic cells get pushed up. For the most part, they stay where they are. They stay in that certain area, and they'll go through their life cycle. So they'll develop and then die off, but then they'll be replaced by another one. Right. Yeah. So that's why they're easily reproduced, because they're right in that area. Yeah. So if you think of cells, I guess it's not great. Think about it, just them being kind of anchored or located in one location, they don't move up. Keratinocytes are really designed for protection. Those mechanical protection, buffing off the skin, but those are. What other questions do you have? Those of you who are here, just stick around. Recording. But if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and finish up. Have any other further questions?